All right, happy Wednesday, everybody. It's your host, Wes Seiler for the Birking Conservative, and I am thrilled today to be talking to you on our solo podcast. This is always a ton of fun. We've been doing this for a couple weeks now. Last week, we had about 10 folks who were watching live, a couple hundred folks who watched afterwards, and I love getting your comments on this show. And really, this is just an open forum where we can talk about anything that we want. So if there are topics that you want to hear us talk about, if you have a particular theme that you want to see, then just send me an email at birkingconservative@gmail.com. Go on our website. You can message us on Facebook or Instagram and YouTube, whether it's theory. We can talk about philosophy and Edmund Burke and conservatism. We can talk about politics. We can talk about art, media, whatever you want from a particular point of view. And if you follow this channel for a while, then you know that I love getting the back and forth and the exchange and the debate. So that's always a ton of fun for me. And of course, I respect everybody's opinion that we have that follows. 99% of the time it is. We've had liberals on this page. We've had moderates, libertarians, Trump conservatives, never Trumpers, and everybody in between. And I love having that. So if you're watching live, looks like we've got a couple folks that are jumping in already. Send me a comment. Let me know what you're thinking, what topics this week have caught your eye, whether that's in the news or something else that you've been seeing. And we'll get into that tonight if we can. And then if not, we'll do it on a future episode. Where we can start tonight is on what I've called the conservative civil war. So we put out this graphic today because this is what I'm seeing so much in the news. I'm seeing it, people's Facebook and their social media. They're talking about it. So much of the focus is on the conservative movement, even as we move forward under a liberal Biden administration. So many people are already thinking about what's going to happen in 2 years, what's going to happen in 2024. Who are going to be the leaders in the conservative movement going forward? Is it going to look the same as it has the past 4 years, or is it going to be totally different? And there are already a bunch of relationships that are starting to fracture and change, and maybe some people expected it, but it's kind of amazing to me that it's happening so quickly. It's like people are already beginning to posture for something that's years and years away, and in some cases showing sides of themselves that they probably have been holding dormant or not quite as obvious until now. So we're going to get into that. And I'm really curious about, your thoughts in terms of who's going to win out on this. Are they going to be able to bridge the gap and come back together when the time comes? Or is this going to affect future prospects for the Republican Party? Could we get to a point where there are two parties? Could we get to a point where, people just get fed up with the Republican Party and they say, hey, we need a Patriot Party. We need a conservative party. And they start doing that instead. Is that a possibility? I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. But, right now, what we are seeing is several relationships that haven't been that close, to be honest with you, but have been within the same administration. And you can see on the graphic here, I've got a couple of them that are starting to change. These are people that were working within the Trump administration. In the case of Nikki Haley, we'll talk about people that worked very closely with the Trump administration in terms of Mitch McConnell, and we'll talk about a few others. But I want to kind of go into the past week and what we have seen in terms of what people have been saying about each other within the Republican Party. So starting off with Nikki Haley, she had some bold criticism, and I talked about this on Sunday briefly, but I want to actually get into what she said just a few days ago to Politico and a couple other news organizations that carried it. Is that she, talking about Trump, she said, we need to acknowledge that he let us down. He went down a path he shouldn't have, and we shouldn't have followed him, and we shouldn't have listened to him. And we can't let that ever happen again. And, of course, Nikki Haley supported Marco Rubio in the primaries, but ultimately she at least said that she got on board with Donald Trump. She served as his UN ambassador, but now she's going beyond saying, hey, maybe we need to change, to the point of expressing regret for ever having followed him. And then, of course, talking about a we pronoun there. Who's the we? Is that all conservative? Is that all Republicans? Because, frankly, I don't think much of the base is there. And for her to declare war on Trump, saying we never should have followed you and you've gone down this path that we don't agree with, we shouldn't listen to you. That is like primary talk. That is like something that maybe Ted Cruz could have said about Trump during the primaries, but that he hasn't said since. So really shocking that she's no longer walking this line between working in and with the Trump administration to the point of trying to set herself apart. I mean, it's just absolutely fascinating to see that kind of talk from her. Mitch McConnell is another one where there's a fracture. This is, he did vote against Trump being convicted in the Senate during the impeachment trials, but he said, well, the reason why I did that is because he's not in office, which implies that if he had been, then McConnell would have voted for that. And so Trump released a statement a couple of days ago, really just attacking Mitch McConnell. Same kind of talk here from Trump back at somebody who worked closely with him at times. And he said that Mitch McConnell is a dour, sullen, and unsmiling political hack, and that if Republican senators are going to stay with him, they will not win again. And then he goes on in this statement to basically put the failures of Republicans in terms of trying to win the Senate. Obviously, they didn't do that, especially in Georgia. He put that essentially on the feet or blaming Mitch McConnell for it. And so he said it was because of Mitch McConnell that we lost the Senate, and essentially that Mitch McConnell will not do what the country needs to be done, and that supporters of the conservative movement, of the Republican Party, should be looking for a new leader. He even goes on in that statement to talk about how Mitch McConnell was begging for support just to win his own election in Kentucky and could have lost without Trump. So there's a break here as well with Mitch McConnell and Nikki Haley, both separate from Trump. And then I guess the big question, and I'm curious to get people's thoughts on this, is trying to read Mike Pence has not been easy over the past few weeks. I mean, there's all these stories, and I don't know how much of it is true because there's always, an incentive from left-leaning media to try to create divides between conservatives. But it seems that there could be something to the notion that Mike Pence has certainly some ill will towards Trump, that he doesn't feel comfortable with him the way he used to do after the Capitol riots. It seems like Mike Pence is blaming Trump for it. And then, of course, he's going off with the Heritage Foundation, Young America's Foundation, to try to set up some of his own network. So the question here is he setting himself up as well to try to be a leader in the conservative movement in his own right? So that's kind of an open question there in terms of these three. Are they breaking with Trump because they have ideological disagreements? Or are they breaking with him because they've never really agreed with him in the first place, and they've only been doing this to wait for their chance in the sun? Is it about power, or is it about the conservative movement? And that's tough to read. But at the same time, because of these statements that have been made, at least by the first two, and the stance that Mike Pence is taking, it's likely that this divide isn't going anywhere anytime soon. And so what we see is the conservative movement is starting to fracture in deep ways. Is on one side, you have Donald Trump, you have the people that are closest to him, you have numerous different conservative leaders who feel indebted to him, who are praising what he's done. And then you have on this other side, other Republicans who have long been leaders in the movement who are now saying, oh, we never should have followed him, or I'm never going to work with him. And so where does that leave us? And I think about it in terms of the Democratic Party, where they've been and really still are, where you have, you have the left-leaning, truly left-leaning members of the party like AOC and Bernie Sanders. And then you have more of the establishment style Democrats like Joe Biden and others. And how do they bridge that gap? By going under the umbrella of Joe Biden. So could we see Trump come back in 2024? And would these people ever have a place in a future Trump administration if he were to retake the presidency? It doesn't seem like it with the comments that they've been making. But again, I'm curious to get your thoughts. The other option is, are there future leaders that could take their roles? And could we look at a different minority leader in the Senate? Could you look at someone different running for president besides Nikki Haley in the future? Now, in terms of the broader movement of conservatism and where it needs to go overall, one of the things that I believe, and I've talked about this a little bit on the show, is that I believe the conservative movement, regardless of which personalities, rise to the forefront in the future, overall, it needs to recover its ethos. And I kind of want to define this because this word is important, is if you look at what it actually means, there's different forms of a character or a center to a movement. There's things like logos, which is a Greek word talking about the logical center of what you're doing. There's pathos, which is the emotional center of a movement. Ethos is an ethical center or appeal. It means the virtuous aspects of a movement. What are they appealing to in terms of how people should and shouldn't act? And with conservatism, I think we are missing that. We have an emotional appeal. I think that's very central to the conservative movement. It's been there for a long time. There's an enormous amount of anger in the conservative movement at the left, at where the country has been going for years, at the silencing of many conservatives within media. You can look at what's happened with Disney Plus and Gina Carano in the past weeks as examples of that type of silencing that's occurred. So there's this emotional appeal to be able to respond to that. I do think there's a logical appeal, something that we could talk about in terms of the policy positions and how to be able to make logical arguments to defend conservatism. But I think what is sorely lacking right now is an ethical appeal. I don't see that as often. And when I do see it, it almost always it gets a lot of attention. It's just so rare in the conservative movement today. And that brings me to Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh passed away today, and I put out a couple posts on our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter about this. And he's a controversial figure. He has been a controversial figure for decades, going back to the 90s when he really started to gain fame with his radio show. But he is someone that everyone understands as conservative and sees as central to the conservative movement. And having been around, doing this for over 30 years, he's a voice that many people, have feelings about. Many listen to him, respect him, and have done since they were, kids. Other people, especially on the left, can't stand him, but everyone understands that he's a formidable, influential person. And one of the things that you see about Rush Limbaugh is that he commands this broad audience. And he doesn't do a lot of speeches. He does not. He typically has his golden mic and he does all that. And you can tune into his radio show. But rarely, if ever, does he actually get out there and give a speech. That being said, in 2009, I was still in college at the time. I had an opportunity to listen to him speak live and in person. And I'll never forget it. That was years ago. But Rush actually came to a conservative conference called CPAC, and he spoke to a room full of thousands of people, and he was the keynote speaker. And it's one of the only times that he's done that, where he's actually gotten out front and spoken. You can look at it on YouTube, Rush Limbaugh CPAC 2009, or you can read his speech. But I had one of our followers ask me, well, why did you put out an image of Rush Limbaugh? It seems like you guys may have some differences on some things. And that's certainly true. There are times when I would probably disagree with him. But I can tell you in that speech, I really think he nailed it. And at the center of it was this ethos argument. And I want to share that with you. I think it couldn't be more timely to talk about this out of respect for this man who's done so much and passed away today. So that long speech has a lot of content in it. But I put a quote image out here. And it says, "Let me tell you who conservatives are. We love people. We love the people of this country. We want this to be the greatest country it can be." There's some other aspects to this speech, and I'm going to pull it up right now, where he says that we want every American to be the best he or she chooses to be. We recognize that we are all individuals. We love and revere our founding documents, the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. We believe that a person can be the best he or she wants to be if certain things are just removed from their path, like onerous taxes, regulation, and too much government. We believe that the preamble to the Constitution contains an inarguable truth that we are all endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. And then he goes on to define those, of course, as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And what Rush Limbaugh says is there is this image of conservatives as racist and bigoted and hateful and angry and sarcastic and mean. And he's like, there's something more than that. There is this love, not just for freedom itself, but for people and wanting them to succeed, wanting them to make choices in their life that are essentially a huge factor in their fate, and believing that people have the chance to be more than the circumstances they find themselves in. And then if government is involved and we're relying totally on welfare for people to succeed, then it removes the opportunity for someone to be able to demonstrate their talent, their abilities, and the will to be able to rise above. And it erodes that freedom. And so he says, people may think that we just care about money or fame or whatever, but there's actually beneath all that, there's actually a love and a care for people and a love for the common person, man or woman, who's just doing a job and taking care of their family and doing all of the right things. There's nothing wrong with someone who chooses to do that. If you want to climb your way up to the top of whatever industry, great, that's awesome. But if you don't, if you want to have a quiet, peaceful life and you're willing to work to do that, then good on you for that, as opposed to this kind of stratified society where based on, how high up you are in your industry, that makes you a better person somehow. It's against that. It's, again, respecting people's rights to determine their own fate and supporting that and removing some of the regulation that prevents that. So I think of that as an ethical ethos type argument that we don't always hear. And so there's principles that come out of it in Rush's speech that, again, a love for people, the potential of individuals, a skepticism of welfare, not because it's money that is given to people, but because with it comes strings and attachments and potentially a block to their success. And then a love of personal diversity, like I was just saying, of where someone wants to go, allowing them to choose that versus forcing them into one type of lifestyle. And I love that. And I think that regardless of where you stand, maybe you are looking forward to Trump coming back in 2024. You think he should run for president again and go back and run just the same way he did before. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're on the side of Mike Pence or Nikki Haley or one of these other people. Regardless of that, our movement has to be bigger than any one or two people, and it has to be about these type of principles, specifically from an ethical sense. And Rush Limbaugh didn't always get it right, in my opinion, but here in this speech and listening to it live, it was absolutely clear that he nailed it. And people loved it. We were constantly standing and applauding. And the feeling that everyone had walking out of there is that this guy understands what makes us conservative. And it's virtue. It's virtuous. It's not this evil, racist, bigoted movement. It's a movement based upon affection and care for people and a desire for them to succeed. And we just don't hear that enough anymore. And I would love for us to rediscover that going forward. I would love for the conservative movement to make those types of arguments again, of showing how people can succeed within a conservative framework, and whatever that looks like. And it looks like different things for different people. So that's my thoughts on Rush. I'll never forget that speech. I'll never forget the voice that he offered, to so many people who were looking for it. And so much of the success that Republicans have been enjoying can be attributed back to him. And I think we need leaders who have, that level of influence and strength and emotional, ethical, and logical arguments to boot. And I hope that we discover that over the next few years. So let me know what your thoughts are. That's my thoughts on the Civil War currently. But we'll see. We'll see how his people posture and change over the next few years, where that goes. That being said, our channel is always going to be following it. So take a look at our YouTube. Take a look at our website, theburkingconservative.com. We're going to have our shows on Sunday where we're going to debate this even more. Feel free, like I said, to send us emails on topics that you want us to cover. We'll be happy to do it. I hope you have a wonderful week, that you're staying warm. Down here in Florida, it's pretty dang cold for us, and that's not normal. So we're all bundling it up and trying to make it through. But I hope you're doing well. Hope your families are doing well. And we look forward to seeing you next week.